Dallas Wings Curt Miller is practically on his knees begging WNBA fans to show Paige Bueckers the same insane support they give Caitlin Clark. Miller's celebrating like he won the lottery because technically he did. But here's the cold hard truth. Paige isn't Caitlin, and Miller's desperation to recreate the Clark phenomenon in Dallas reeks of a franchise that knows lightning rarely strikes twice in the same league. If you haven't seen the clips yet, Miller has been all over social media practically salivating at the thought of Paige Bueckers bringing that Caitlin Clark magic to Dallas. The desperation is so thick you could cut it with a knife, and honestly, it's getting embarrassing. Let's start with what Miller actually said. In a recent interview, he couldn't stop gushing about Clark's impact on the league. Caitlin had an unbelievable impact on the court, and her adjustment was quick and very, very productive. You saw how hot Indiana got and how dangerous they were late in the year, and a lot of that was accredited to Caitlin's quick adjustment. Translation: please, basketball gods, let Paige do the same thing for us. Miller went on to discuss how teams around the league noticed changes in something as simple as security for our players and how to navigate the increased viewership, the increased fandom. He talked about implementing best practices that Indiana established with Clark. But here's where things get interesting, and by interesting I mean delusional. Miller seems to believe that Paige Bueckers will generate the same level of hysteria, the same skyrocketing ticket sales, the same merchandise explosion, and the same record-breaking viewership that Clark brought to the league. Let me be crystal clear, that is not happening. This isn't a knock on Paige Bueckers. She's a phenomenal player who just led UConn to a national championship. She's skilled, marketable, and will absolutely be an asset to the WNBA, but comparing her potential impact to what Caitlin Clark has done is like comparing a thunderstorm to a hurricane. The numbers don't lie. The national championship game this year with Paige Bueckers drew 8.9 million viewers, which is excellent by women's basketball standards, but it was still down significantly from the 10 million who tuned in when Clark was playing last year. Even in victory, Bueckers couldn't match Clark's viewership in defeat. And it's not just about numbers, it's about playing style and marketability. Caitlin Clark revolutionized women's basketball with a style of play we've literally never seen before from a female athlete. Logo three-pointers. No-look passes that would make Magic Johnson proud. A combination of skills that was completely unprecedented in the women's game. As one analyst put it, we've never seen a woman do that, and it's all in one damn player. Paige Bueckers, for all her talents, doesn't offer that same revolutionary appeal. She's an excellent scorer in the mold of Diana Taurasi or Kobe Bryant, exceptional but familiar. We've seen that prototype before. What we hadn't seen before Clark was a woman pulling up from the logo and threading no-look passes with equal proficiency. Yes, Bueckers sold the most merchandise of any collegiate player in March, but that pales in comparison to what Clark did for the WNBA when Clark entered the league. Ticket prices for Fever games increased by over 500%. Season ticket sales jumped 20-fold. Television ratings doubled and sometimes tripled. Her jersey became the best-selling rookie jersey in WNBA history before she even played a game. That's not just success, that's a cultural phenomenon. What Miller is really doing here is setting Bueckers up for unfair comparisons and potentially inevitable disappointment. By publicly linking expectations for Bueckers to what Clark accomplished, he's creating a standard that virtually no rookie could meet. It's particularly telling that Miller couldn't even bring himself to directly mention Paige in most of his comments. He danced around it talking about this draft class and keeping the momentum going. Why? Because even he knows the comparison is stretched. The most honest moment in Miller's media tour came when the cameras caught his reaction to winning the draft lottery. The pure unbridled joy, jumping up and down screaming yes, yes, revealed just how desperately the franchise needed this win. And who can blame him? The Dallas Wings haven't exactly been the centerpiece of the WNBA universe. The franchise has struggled with attendance, visibility, and relevance in a market dominated by the Cowboys, Mavericks, and Rangers. Landing Bueckers is unquestionably a massive win for them. But Miller's transparent attempt to position Bueckers as the next Caitlin Clark does a disservice to both players. First, it's unfair to Bueckers, who deserves the chance to establish her own identity and impact in the league without constant comparisons to Clark. Second, it fundamentally misunderstands what made Clark's impact so singular. Clark didn't just show up and generate attention because she was a hyped college player. She captured the national imagination with a style of play that transcended traditional boundaries of women's basketball. Miller talks about implementing the best practices that Indiana established with Clark, as if Clark's impact was somehow the result of shrewd marketing or operational excellence rather than her once-in-a-generation talent and appeal. This gets to a deeper truth about sports stardom that many WNBA executives seem reluctant to acknowledge. You can't manufacture cultural phenomena. They happen organically when the right athlete with the right skills arrives at the right moment. The Indiana fever didn't create the Caitlin Clark effect. Caitlin Clark did. She was already a sensation before she ever put on a fever jersey. All Indiana did was not mess it up. What's particularly revealing about Miller's comments is how they expose the league's hunger for mainstream relevance. After years of fighting for attention and resources, the WNBA suddenly found itself at the center of the sports conversation thanks largely to Clark. The resulting boost in attendance, viewership and merchandise sales has been transformative. Of course, every team wants a piece of that action. Of course, Dallas is hoping Bueckers can replicate some fraction of that success, but wishing doesn't make it so. The history of sports is littered with next big things who were burdened with impossible expectations because they followed transcendent stars. Remember when Andrew Wiggins was supposed to be the next LeBron, or when Harold Miner was dubbed Baby Jordan? These comparisons rarely work out well for the athlete being measured against an impossible standard. This isn't to say Bueckers won't be successful. She absolutely will be. She's a tremendous talent who should have an outstanding WNBA career. But success shouldn't be measured by whether she generates Clark-level attention and revenue. What makes Miller's comments even more problematic is how they feed into an unnecessary rivalry narrative between Clark and Bueckers. Women's basketball has fought for decades to be taken seriously on its own merits, yet here we have a coach essentially saying, "We want what they have," as if the success of one player somehow diminishes another. The reality is that the WNBA benefits most when multiple stars thrive simultaneously. The league doesn't need the next Caitlin Clark. It needs Paige Bueckers to be the best version of herself while Clark continues her trajectory, and other stars like Angel Reese, Cameron Brink and established veterans all contribute to the league's growth. Miller's approach reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how sports fame works in the modern era. You can't just plug in a highly rated college player and expect Clark-level attention. If it were that simple, every top draft pick would generate the same reaction. What made Clark unique wasn't just her college success or her draft position, it was the way she played the game, her charisma, and how she captured the imagination of people who had never before watched women's basketball. That's not something you can replicate through best practices or marketing strategies. It's lightning in a bottle. The most telling part of Miller's media tour wasn't what he said about Clark or Bueckers. It was his comment about the league's historical struggle for attention. "I've always believed that we've had an incredible product. It was just how do we continue to get more and more eyes on our game and more people through the turnstiles to get into those games." This gets to the heart of the matter. The WNBA has always had talented players. What it lacked was mainstream attention. Clark provided that in unprecedented ways, and now every team is scrambling to find their own version. But here's the uncomfortable truth that Miller and other WNBA executives need to face: there isn't another Caitlin Clark. Not in this draft class. Not in next year's draft class. Perhaps not for a generation. That doesn't mean the league can't continue to grow or that Bueckers won't be a star. It just means that expecting any rookie to replicate what Clark did is setting them up for perceived failure, even if their actual performance is outstanding. What makes the situation even more complex is the timing of Bueckers' entry into the league. She's not just any top draft pick. She's the top pick immediately following the Clark phenomenon. Every aspect of her rookie season will be measured against what Clark did, whether that's fair or not. If Dallas doesn't see the same immediate surge in ticket sales and merchandise that Indiana experienced, will that be considered a disappointment? If television ratings for Wings games don't double or triple, will executives question Bueckers' star power? These are unfair standards that no player should have to meet, yet Miller's comments are practically inviting these comparisons. What's particularly frustrating about this situation is that it distracts from what should be the focus: Bueckers' actual game and how she might fit with the Wings roster. Instead of talking about X's and O's, player development and team chemistry, we're discussing ticket sales and viewership projections as if those are more important than basketball itself. This is the trap the WNBA must avoid as it experiences this unprecedented surge in popularity. The business metrics matter, of course, but they shouldn't overshadow the game itself. Miller did touch on basketball briefly, noting that winners are important to us and highlighting Bueckers' national championship as a positive factor, but even this felt like an afterthought compared to his thinly veiled hopes for Clark-like commercial impact. What's particularly ironic about Miller's approach is that it might actually undermine Bueckers' ability to make her own unique impact on the league. By framing her arrival in terms of what Clark accomplished, he's narrowing the possibilities for how Bueckers might connect with fans and contribute to the league's growth in her own way. Instead of asking, will Bueckers be the next Clark, a more productive question would be, what unique qualities does Bueckers bring that might resonate with fans and expand the WNBA's audience in new directions? Because the truth is, Bueckers does have star quality. She has a compelling personal story, tremendous skill and a charismatic personality. She's also coming off a national championship, which gives her momentum that Clark didn't have entering the league. But those qualities will be most powerful if they're allowed to shine on their own terms, not constantly measured against what someone else accomplished. This gets to a deeper issue about how women's sports are covered and marketed. There's often a tendency to focus on individual stars rather than teams or the game itself, as if women's sports can only be relevant if they're personified by a transcendent personality. This approach creates a feast or famine dynamic where the presence or absence of a single star can seemingly determine the entire enterprise's value. It's a precarious foundation for building sustained growth. The healthiest path forward for the WNBA isn't trying to replicate the Clark phenomenon with every top draft pick. It's leveraging Clark's impact to elevate the entire league while allowing new stars to emerge organically. Miller's obvious excitement about landing the top pick is understandable. The clip of him celebrating the lottery win, jumping up and down screaming yes repeatedly, captures the genuine importance of this moment for the Dallas franchise. The Wings have struggled to establish a foothold in the Dallas market, averaging just 4,115 fans per game last season despite having talented players like Arike Ogunbowale and Satu Sabally. Landing Bueckers represents a legitimate opportunity to increase the team's visibility and connection with the local community. But that opportunity is best realized if Bueckers is allowed to be herself rather than a Clark replacement. The Wings should be focusing on how Bueckers' skills complement their existing roster, how her personality might connect with Dallas fans, and how her championship pedigree could help establish a winning culture. Instead, Miller's comments suggest the organization is primarily focused on replicating commercial outcomes rather than basketball ones. This approach reflects a broader tension within the WNBA right now. After years of fighting for attention and resources, the league suddenly finds itself with unprecedented visibility thanks largely to Clark. This has created both opportunities and challenges. The opportunity is obvious: more fans, more revenue, more coverage, but the challenge is how to sustain and build upon this momentum without becoming overly dependent on a single star. Miller's comments suggest the league hasn't fully figured out this balance yet. There's a palpable desperation to keep the momentum going, to find the next phenomenon to ensure the surge in popularity wasn't just a Clark-specific blip. This desperation is understandable, but potentially counterproductive. The WNBA's best path to sustained growth isn't trying to find Clark clones, it's capitalizing on the increased attention to showcase the league's overall quality and diversity of talent. What's particularly short-sighted about Miller's approach is how it fails to recognize the unique circumstances that made Clark's impact possible. Clark didn't just bring her own fans to the WNBA, she brought people who had never watched women's basketball at all. These new viewers weren't necessarily drawn by her college accomplishments or draft position. They were captivated by her revolutionary playing style, her confidence, and her ability to do things on a basketball court that they hadn't seen from a female athlete before. Bueckers, for all her talents, doesn't offer that same revolutionary appeal. She's an excellent player in a more traditional mold. That doesn't mean she can't be a star or contribute to the league's growth. It just means the path will necessarily look different. What Miller and the Wings should be focusing on is how to leverage Bueckers' unique strengths rather than trying to replicate Clark's impact.